Okay, let's go ahead and see if we can get this finished in one video. Nixon, last part, the very, very infamous Watergate. One word says a lot. I bet you've heard that word before, but let's go ahead. And I think we finished on the economy, Nixonomics, the recession starting, etc. And then down there at the very bottom, you have a little area that says 1972 election. So let's talk about it. 1972 re-election year. Nixon runs for re-election against Democrat George McGovern. He was labeled an outsider, supported immigrants and abortion, and Roe versus Wade had just happened. We learned about that last time, or was about to happen. I'm sorry, 1973. But Nixon is going to win the fourth largest margin of victory in American history in 1972. They loved him. Let me show you this map real quick. Oh, here you go. Now more than ever. That's a pretty big nose. But with that, let's go ahead and take a look. Election of 1972. George McGovern. Bam! You won Massachusetts. Congratulations, McGovern. Nixon won everything else. Fourth largest margin in history. They loved him. The 1972 election saw a shift in voting patterns. Only blacks, Jews, and poor voted overwhelmingly Democratic. Everybody, of course, including the Sun Belt, the silent majority, and even the conservative few are going to take and they are going to vote for Nixon. Now, the secret war did leave a bad taste in their mouth, but he did end the war. We are now out of Vietnam in about 1973. And they don't mind giving him another term, and they want to see what he can do. And I'll be honest with you, the Democrats didn't put up anybody really very good. So the big question, essential question of this was, does the achievements of Nixon deserve to be outshadowed by this one word, Watergate? Well, to answer that question, détente, Vietnamization, peace with honor, all this stuff, this. And he's done some good things. EPA, Environmental Species Act. He reshaped SCOTUS. He's making the silent majority somewhat happy, okay? But this one word, Watergate, is still there. You need to know what it is before you answer that essential question. So here's what I have. Down at the bottom, I have just a whole box, and it just says Watergate. Again, I think the stuff in red is important, so you might want to pause and get it down. But I then want you to listen to what happened. So pause and get this stuff down. All right, it's 1972. He is running for re-election. And Nixon, is going to basically order a break-in at the Democratic headquarters. And this Democratic headquarters in Washington, D.C. was at a hotel, an office hotel, if you will, called the Watergate. Okay? Now, in 1972, this break-in at the Democratic George McGovern's headquarters revealed a well-funded plan of basically espionage, sabotage, and the fact is that the Republicans were trying to get dirt on the Democrats to use in the election. Nixon wanted to make sure he won, even though if you look at this map right here, did he have to make sure he won? No, which is kind of crazy when you find out that this is what brings him down. And he won that election so easily. Now, one thing that I will tell you is that Nixon was also very paranoid, okay? He wiretaped every single conversation that he ever had in the Oval Office. And it's going to be those wiretapings that are going to basically include him or kind of solidify that he knew about this break-in, which is illegal activity by the President of the United States. There was another thing that happened in 1972. You might want to take note of this as well. And we've already talked about it in class, but those Pentagon papers revealing the government's prior planning to the Vietnam in 1960 before the Gulf of Tonkin broke out. So it's going to add fuel to the Watergate fire. Now here is this hotel, the Watergate. And you can actually still go today and stay at the Watergate. It is a hotel, okay? Now, the Watergate complex is going to be broken into, like I said, both by those guys. They go to jail for breaking and entering, and when they start researching on where were these guys from, etc., they all of a sudden realize that they are connected to the White House, and the wiretapings are going to prove it eventually. But here's the deal. You have to get Nixon to turn over those tapes. And you have to basically tie Nixon to all this stuff. These two reporters, you need to make sure you get their names down. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein are going to break the Watergate story. And they are reporters for the Washington Post, and they can tell you and they report that Nixon is involved in this massive break-in at the Watergate Democratic National headquarters, and they think that it goes all the way up to the White House. So this story breaks and everybody's like, oh my gosh, our president is a criminal. The Pentagon Papers are released, and they again say, oh my God, we can't trust our government. The Watergate scandal begins to unravel in 1973, though, after he's already won his election. The disgusting damning of all. And then all of a sudden, they bring a court case against Nixon because Nixon is trying to claim executive privilege that the president shouldn't have to give over those tapes because they have stuff on it that people don't need to know, like secrets, that protect this country. So the United States sues Nixon. You want to make sure that you get this down. Remember, red meats is important. The United States sues Nixon. SCOTUS orders Nixon to turn over all the tapes. And actually, interesting story, when he turns over those tapes, there was like this 13, 15-minute section. Like all of a sudden, I don't know, it just was erased or it disappeared. We don't know. So long story short, it's beginning to make Nixon look extremely guilty. With the U.S. versus Nixon and the tapes and all of a sudden the missing piece of tape, the U.S. House of Representatives and the Congress bring 3 articles of impeachment. You need to circle that word, impeachment. And you need to put in parentheses what they were: obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress against President Nixon. They literally are going to impeach the President of the United States. Okay, this means he has committed a criminal offense and he is going to be held accountable. Because here's the deal, this country, that's what we do. Presidents are not above the law. Okay, if you break the law, you will be impeached. And if you are successfully impeached, you will be removed from office, which has never happened before, ever. So what does he do to get out of the impeachment? Because he knows he's going down. Nixon, I hereby resign the office of the President of the United States. Okay, Richard Nixon, Secretary of State, is the one he resigned to, his very famous friend, Henry Kissinger. President Nixon becomes the very first president. Here's your big thing. Number one thing. First president in American history. Only president at this point to ever resign. He goes on TV. He basically, before, he's impeached, he says, I didn't do anything. He actually says, your president is not a crook. Well, guess what? It turns out he was. He denies he was a crook. Do you get that cartoon right there? Here he is, Nixon, the tape. I am not a crook, but it's missing. I am a crook. Okay, the Watergate scandal is pretty damning for Nixon. Takes him down. Changes, here's the deal. Big effect, here it is. Massive effect. Changes American perception of the government, and the role of the media becomes a watchdog. Have you ever noticed how our media is always trying to check up on the president? Is he doing the right thing? Is he doing the right thing? President Baby Bush, he knew there were weapons of mass destruction or there weren't weapons of mass destruction. President Obama, he was this or whatever like that, or whoever our next president is going to be. The media becomes this watchdog because of those 2 guys, Woodward and Bernstein, blowing the cover off of this Watergate scandal. And the fact is that Nixon was involved in it. The power of media is going to just unbelievably explode. Some people might think too much, and I might be one of those. But with that, Watergate is going to change forever. The fact that Americans look at our president now, and do we believe him or do we not believe him? We normally don't believe them. It's going to take an amazing president to restore our confidence. After Nixon did this, the secret war, now we have the War Powers Act, so now, all this, the Watergate scandal, I am not a crook. Well, it turns out you were, and the tape is missing. LBJ says, I'm not going to go into Vietnam. Then he does. The JFK, the Bay of Pigs thing, if you follow it back, even, a long ways, we have always somewhat been leery of our presidents, but we've normally supported them. Think about FDR. We would have walked through fire normally to make him happy. Yeah, he did some things wrong, but we would have. The greatest generation stood by him. It's not like that anymore after Nixon. Okay? Teddy Roosevelt began this trend of a stronger president, and it continued throughout the 20th century until Nixon. Nixon is the one that messes it up. Now, I will tell you, very last little part here. And if you'll notice, if it's turning over the page, are you turning over the page to the back? You notice there's a little box that says Ford, and there's a picture of Ford. That is all he's getting. I'm not even giving him a paper. Gerald Ford had been President Nixon's vice president. Interesting fact, total quiz question possibility. Gerald Ford actually was not his original vice president. It was a guy named Spiro Agnew, and he had to resign because of a sex scandal. Yeah, Nixon administration's awesome. So Gerald Ford was appointed as vice president of the United States and approved. Gerald Ford is literally the president of the United States after Nixon resigns, and he was never even elected to vice presidency. Kind of crazy. All you need to know about Ford, this is the only thing that goes in the box. Ford pardoned Nixon for any crimes he would have committed, which made America mad. But he gave them this reason, and you need to know this reason. He said that the U.S. does not need to focus on the trial of Nixon because it had more pressing issues, like the economy. The economy was getting ugly. Nixonomics only fixed it for a little bit. And with that, Ford knows if he doesn't get this together, he's never going to win re-election. But the other interesting thing that Ford did that I want to make sure you know is he appointed George H.W. Daddy Bush to reorganize the CIA. That's going to be interesting later. And he also vetoed 39 Great Society bills, which is interesting because Nixon was a moderate and kept the Great Society. Ford is very much more conservative, and he is going to veto that. So the only three things you need to know about Ford. Pardon Nixon, said we don't need to focus on it. We have suffered enough. Let's focus on fixing this country instead of basically crucifying Nixon. He appointed Daddy Bush to reorganize the CIA, and he vetoed 39 Great Society bills. With that, I hope you are getting this new style of notes. It's pretty easy, but I will tell you I'm still going to give you a day in class to talk to me about them, but you better be ready with these notes, and you'll also notice that there are questions attached to them. Have these questions answered and ready to go the next time I tell you you need them, okay? So with that, I will talk to you later. Y'all are awesome. Remember, Nixon, he is not a crook. Wait, no, he might be. But what about détente? Oh, I don't know. Think about it.